Oh, there we go. I think it's working. Okay, let's see if it's working. Ah, there we go. Nice. Sweet. Okay. There we go. Did it inform you guys? Did it like push a message to your phone that I started this? Is that what happened? Okay, let me make sure the link works. Oh God, yeah, yeah, it does. You were right though. You literally said there was going to be more than one Sam in the chat. That's hilarious. So yeah, I guess I'm just kind of learning how to do this. Yeah, I only started 20 minutes after I was supposed to. Not a big deal, I guess. Bell gang. There we go. I already got people clicking the bell. I'm not even asking for it. Okay. Well, I just posted it onto Twitter. So how's everybody doing tonight? Wonder how many people we can get in here. Yeah, I just ate some Mexican food. I'm doing pretty good. It's a day off, but for me, that's not always a good thing. I guess I've self-identified as an anarchist. Um, just for a few years. I definitely considered myself a socialist before I considered myself an anarchist, and as I understand it, that's a pretty common arc for a lot of people to go through. I think watching a few people do YouTube primers, just kind of on what anarchism is, I realized that I had really always been an anarchist. I just didn't call myself an anarchist. Once I understood that anarchism was the broad and all encompassing opposition to unjustified hierarchies and sort of a default assumption that all hierarchies are unjustified until they justify themselves, I realized that that had pretty much always been my stance. I just didn't know that that was the name for the ideology that practiced that idea. So I don't think that even at that moment I really started calling myself anarchist necessarily. But once I started then reading anarchist literature and started looking into anarchist ideology, I came to realize that it really described a lot of the feelings and thoughts I already had, and really maybe better than any other ideology, any other political ideology I had ever discovered. That being said, I had always liked Chomsky. When I was in the Occupy, I was introduced to Chomsky and Zen, and I had always thought anarcho-syndicalism as an ideology was interesting. And but I would say, kind of looking back at the ideology I had for a long time, I was probably more kind of a sock dim, and who's interested in sort of Chomskyan analysis. But it was after I started actually like reading Rocker and Bakunin and Kropotkin, and more recently like Bookchin and stuff, and also researching anarcho-syndicalism as an ideology, that I realized that that was exactly what I was, or what I identified with. The long answer to a very short question, as I am wont to do. Getting drunk, huh, Sam? Yeah, I agree. Sam, it's scientific skepticism applied to politics. Yes, I sometimes lament that so many of the people in the scientific skeptic community did not discover anarchism and instead became reactionary, fascist adjacent, like neocons, which still is so bizarre to me. I've even thought about doing uh, a video on how all that took place. The immortal science of anarchism. Oh, oh my God. Yeah. Um, I need to get people in here. How many? I got six. Ooh, six. That's better than I thought I was going to do. I was relatively convinced I was going to start up this live stream and there was just literally not going to be anybody in here at all. I was pretty prepared for that to take place. What strategies in the here and now do you feel are most effective for building a revolutionary counterpower? That's a really good question. Um, I've actually been thinking a lot about it recently, because one of the things that I think has, and I know this is sort of blasphemy for any leftist to say of any ideology, but I think one of the things that has aged worst of all of the theory that I've read is what their immediate term practical solutions to fixing problems are. So like, you know, there was this big push by the early syndicalists, especially like Bakunin, to do trade union organizing. And I'm not saying that if you can achieve that, that's not a good thing. It is a good thing, but it is about 20 times more challenging in the modern world than it was back then, partially because we just have a lot more trades. Like everything is so much more atomized, everything is so much more spread out. You have an entire economy of gig workers that literally don't even know their coworkers. Like I've never met a coworker at the job I do. I've literally only met my boss twice. So it becomes very difficult to organize people, to unionize, and then it then becomes even more difficult to do trade unionizing. I think that we're in a time where we have to sort of rediscover what our praxis has to look like in the modern world, and how we're going to approach organizing working people with these new problems in mind that a lot of these old theorists were really not able to foresee, how they would, you know, how they would play out in the future. Obviously, everything they said about back then worked extremely well back then, and to some degree, it would still work now. So I guess more concrete answers would be: we need to build up organizations. We need to we're in the educate portion of the educate, agitate, organize phraseology. A lot of people want us to be at the agitate, organize stage, but we have an entire society of people that don't even really know what the word socialism means. They don't know what the word anarchism means. They definitely don't know what the word communism means. They don't even really know what capitalism is. Like, they live in it, but they don't know what distinguishes capitalism from a bunch of different ideologies. So I think education is a huge thing that we need to be doing right now. We need to be engaging with people in our personal lives. We need to be spreading the ideology and educating people as to what the different words and ideas are. I also think that insofar as that we can achieve it, we need to be building cooperatives. Partially because I think that even though unions are like they're a strong unit in the war that we're fighting, and we need to obviously be trying to organize unions as much as possible. We have seen now what happens to unions that persist for a very long time through capitalism. The early days had this idea in our minds that the union was a fundamentally radical piece of the revolutionary effort, that the union, because its entire existence was predicated on representing the workers, that meant that it couldn't become something that didn't represent the workers. So that ended up not being true. We're in this time now where unions didn't even many unions gave their endorsement to Hillary Clinton last time around. And that's if you were a revolutionary socialist in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was inconceivable. The unions were part and parcel to a revolutionary activity. The unions have now become, highly institutionalized. They've become very much under the control of party apparatchiks in the Democratic Party, but even worse, they've become partially under the control of the businesses that they were meant to be the counterbalance to. So we can't just organize unions. We have to organize radical unions, which is to say they have to be ideological unions. So I think with all of this in mind, we're in the situation where education is what we need to focus on. Those that are educated, they need to be moved through the agitation phase. And that's part of what I'm trying to do on this channel, is educate people and move them from the education to the agitation phase, and hopefully give them some of the tools then that they can start working on the organizing portion of that. But I think a more succinct answer to that question is really that we are in a very exciting but also kind of a very scary time where we have to re-answer that question for ourselves in the modern world. Yeah, Sam, I agree with everything you're saying there. And thank you, Zoomer Nation. Top-notch content, my dude. Thank you. Hopefully I can keep producing good content. I have a lot of scripts in the work right now. Yeah, and I agree, Sam. Not just radical unions. We need a worker co-op movement. Yeah, I've been advocating worker co-ops a lot, and I know a lot of anarchists, especially anarcho-syndicalists, who are really big on the worker cooperative movement right now, because the way I see it is the union is fundamentally a holding maneuver against the existence of capitalist entities. And if you're going to undergo like a violent revolution, that's fine. I mean, you're basically just keeping the businesses from exploiting the people. You're not dissolving the businesses, but you're keeping them under control. Whereas a cooperative, you have actually enacted a miniature version of socialism in this capitalist economy. Of course, they still are under the perverse incentives of a capitalist economy, and they have to seek profit above all else, and they're not confederated, so they don't work things out through the mechanisms we might desire. But I would say a cooperative business is far superior to a capitalist business that is unionized. I'm going to see if I can get the link to this like retweeted, spread around a little bit. Good question so far, though. Okay. I got a comment that it was terrible and they made it about 45 seconds in before they turned it off. Good. Off to a good start here. Good to see you, Rash. Is it a rash or a Rosh? And yeah, I agree with you, Christopher. Unions use existing game pieces, co ops and syndicates create new game pieces. That's exactly how I see it. Um, a big part of anarchist organizing philosophy is the concept of prefiguration. So we are under instead of us trying to create these sort of like intermediate entities which are supposed to be surrogates into the next world, we are trying in every single aspect of what we create to create something that is um, sort of a mirror of the world we want to be. So this comes from a historical disagreement between the authoritarian leftists and the anti-authoritarian leftists, going all the way back to like the First International. The the authoritarian leftists had this idea that no, you can't create socialism now. You can't create those entities in their fully robust form now, because if you do, they will be sabotaged. Whereas the anarchists said, no, everything we do needs to be with the idea in mind that we are creating that world. Every action should be the action of creating a mirror of the entity we wish to see in the new world. Um, and I fundamentally think that the second one has worked quite a bit better. And insofar as that any revolution has worked, regardless of whether it called itself Leninist or not, it has worked because it did the latter of those two things. Building dual power is prefiguration. Building dual power, going around, organizing the countryside to offer alternative methods, to provide their own food, to give each other health care, to spread mutual aid in order to not have to rely upon the capitalist entities, that is an act of prefiguration. Insofar as that Leninists have been successful in doing that, they're actually using anarchist organizing ethos. Yeah, and I agree with that too, Sam. You can't create the world you want that you want to see without modeling that world for others first. And I think that's a big part of what I've noticed. Um, People are far easier to radicalize when they understand what it is you are proposing you want to make after this world. If if you just say everything you don't like about this world, you go, oh man, capitalism sucks, exploitation, they're stealing my labor value, they've got all the power, they've got all the power and I've got none, people will agree. You can get all kinds of regular people to agree with those things. But that is not radicalizing if they believe that that's all that can be. And if they don't have a good vision of what's going to come afterwards. If people don't understand what it is that you propose to replace this with, they are often just going to see what you're saying as being very pie in the sky. People want a solid, coherent understanding of the world that it comes after. Only then can they develop the consciousness and the fully realized expectations to actually conceive how to fight, to actually even know what needs to be done to bring it about. If all they know is what's wrong, they can figure out how to undermine it, but just tearing things down is not enough. We don't want primitivism. We're not just trying to tear it all down for no reason whatsoever. We're trying to put something better in its place. That requires giving people a vision. So that's also what prefiguration does. Prefiguration is showing them what it is that we want to replace things with. Another good reason to want co-ops. Yeah, yeah, and once again, Sam, yeah, it's what the CNTFAI did. They even though they seized a lot of factories, they also like very much modeled the model of confederation that would later become standard boilerplate anarchist organizing ethos. The idea that every time you claim a power structure, it is confederated together in a larger body with all of your other power structures, and they all make decisions together. That happened very early on, even though there were lots of splits. Yeah, no, I agree. Green element primitivism is pretty cringe. Yeah, and having made good faith attempts to talk with people who were anarcho primitivists, I can't see how you're ever going to build a revolutionary movement on that ideology, even if somehow we conceded that it was desirable, which I don't even think it's desirable. It's only going to recreate feudalism in my mind. Um, it no, you are not going to convince a society of people with cell phones, computers, and the internet that they want to fight a revolution to tear down cell phones, the internet, and computers. That's just literally, that's not conceivable. That's not even, we shouldn't even want it. Number one, we should be trying to figure out a way to maintain the progress we've made without destroying everything. Okay. But it's also just not something you're ever going to create a revolutionary fervor to institute. It's not a utopian world. It's very dystopian. The state of nature, maybe some of our social organization was better back then, but it was miserable. It was miserable. It was hard to live in the state of nature. You were constantly in a state of deprivation, constantly on the border of starving if anything goes wrong. People aren't going to fight for that. People aren't going to fight to go back to the state of nature. So Christopher Nivens says, "What are your thoughts on alternatives to money? For example, time banking. Does it seem reasonable for worker co-ops under good conditions to offer time banking to link workers to exchange with other co-ops?" Um, you say idea being to begin to break away the dual power economy from the capitalist economy. I would say insofar as that it's doable, it could be desirable. Um, I have I have I have a lot of thoughts on the attempts to replace a monetary economy with some other form of economy. And I'm not the first person to have thoughts on that. It kind of goes back a ways. But first, I would need it demonstrated for me personally that changing the form of the monetary system to instead representing like labor vouchers or time vouchers or whatever, that was going to produce superior outcomes. If it's going to produce superior outcomes, then obviously I'm going to consider it. But I'm afraid that most of what makes a system where monetary exchange organizes everything bad is that we end up with scarcity, we end up with hoarding, uh, and that all is mostly facilitated by the fact that a market just still exists. So, insofar as a market still exists, I don't personally, and I don't have like super strong opinions on this either way. But insofar as a market exists, I don't think you're really going to avoid most of those inherent problems of like hoarding, people trading influence, price gouging, and stuff like that. I mean, even if the wealth that each person has is based upon the time, for example, that they've put into labor, then you're going to find that people who are able to do their jobs for longer, either because they are genetically gifted with a lot of stamina, or that their job allows them luxury of doing it for very, very extended periods of time, those people are just going to end up better off. And I wonder if that's really going to turn out a whole lot better than the other version of the system. I'm not saying it wouldn't, but I'm I guess I'm not settled on whether it would be superior or not. Yeah, what you say depends on the theory of work. I mean, all of these things depend on how you want to measure, right? Like, how do you measure a lot of these? Paracon, I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but Paracon for me has some of those similar kind of things. Let's see here. So Sam Malik says, also from the perspective of building power over time, building institutions that model our values is the way to build economic power that can then over time rival and overtake capitalists. Yeah, yeah. Even in a benign sense of the electoral process, which I'm sure isn't the most popular opinion, right? Yeah. Let's see here. Co-op federations have a better chance at putting up electeds for office that adhere to our principles. Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. Insofar as that electoral politics are going to have any success, one of our problems is essentially that almost all of the politicians we would be competing against are all bought by our opponents and are very much influenced and formed by the system that they exist inside of. If we build a co-op federation and that co-op federation then absorbs enough capital into itself that it now has power and influence, it can then also use some portion of its assets to place, anarchists into the electoral system, and that is actually something the CNT-FAI, or rather, at that point, it was the CNTA or CNT is one organization, the FAI is another one. They actually did. There were anarchist politicians in pre-Civil War Spain, which sounds bizarre to us now, and a lot of people have some real criticisms as to how effective that was. But yes, insofar as we want to use the electoral system, building a co-op economy is obviously going to allow us to run more politicians with our ideology, if indeed that is the course of action that these organizations wanted to go through. So you say, from what I understand, primitivists are wishy-washy when it comes to how they get from point A to point B. I think the most common answer is that collapse is inevitable, and they'll say it's regrettable while also celebrating it. Yeah, I kind of noticed the same thing. And I disagree. Actually, I don't think collapse in the sheer societal sense is inevitable. I think for people that are primitivists, I think this is wishful thinking. I think that humans have demonstrated that they are one of the most hyper adaptive species to ever exist on the face of this planet, because our minds are so good at what they do. The chance that all of society is going to collapse in on itself, even under really terrible circumstances, to me is not feasible. I don't think that's going to happen, and planning for it is just wishful thinking for people that want primitivism. It's not going to happen. What kind of exercise machine is behind you? That's my girlfriend's. I think it's like an elliptical or something. Yeah, yeah. I think it's an elliptical. That was the most important question so far, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah, the Marcora law. Yeah. I haven't talked about that on the channel, but that's something we should definitely talk about at some point. Insofar as we're trying to use the system against itself, I think the Marcora law is actually one of the most effective things we could do to make the system sabotage itself. The Marcora law, for anybody that doesn't know, is a law in Italy which says when people are laid off by a business, they are able to take the entirety of the unemployment that would be paid out to them over the course of the coming years, everything that is owed to them by the state. They're able to take that out as a loan with other fellow laid off workers and reinvest it specifically into worker cooperatives. Um, so in this way, it's interesting because every time a business decides that it wants to do mass layoffs, it is essentially fueling the cooperatives which will compete with it in the market. And I think that sounds like something pretty good if we could get that passed. Yeah, you say, thanks for speaking the truth about primitivism. While a noble goal, it seems to me to be devoid from reality. Can you elaborate? I don't even I don't even know if what I've heard primitivists propose is even a noble goal. I mean, so okay, I've been listening to Kropotkin's Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution, which is really good. It's super interesting, talking a lot about what we would call primitive cultures, and how they managed their societies. And in many ways, the ways they managed their societies were far preferable to the way we manage our societies. There was so much more cooperation, so much less conception of selfishness, so much less of an idea that my property is worth more than the happiness of other people. Um, and I think that was super important. And I think the primitivists sort of romanticize the early human societies as something we should want to return to, not in spirit, but in actual practical application. And I am willing to have a primitivist tell me otherwise and to explicate a description of primitivism that is not that, but I have not interacted with a primitivist that is not essentially asking for us to return to the state of nature and then reproduce early human societies. So Christopher says, left field question, but how might we imagine transnational syndicalism as a form of dual power to undermine, battle, subdue, destroy transnational corporations? Well, it's something that could definitely take place in the future. I think at the moment, however, we're in this situation where cooperatives aren't strong enough to be transnational, except for, some few examples like Mondragon and things. And this isn't because of any inherent lack in the cooperative structure. It's just they haven't had the time. Corporations have been developing for so much longer than any cooperative movement, such that corporations have had a long time to accumulate capital, influence, bargaining power in the economy, and that has slowly grown and grown and grown, and they've grown bigger and bigger and bigger until finally, to compete with each other, they had to go, international. They had to go global, and that's the situation we're in. Now, if the cooperative sector of the economy is allowed to develop in such a way for a long enough period of time and to accumulate capital and bargaining power in the economy, you will probably find that eventually the cooperative sector will also go global. I think that transition period is a time of extreme threat to the principles of a cooperative style of management, such that when anything becomes extremely powerful, you should always be wary of what it does with that power. And even cooperatives could obviously undermine all of our goals and ideals if indeed they were managed the wrong way, if their internal structure became more hierarchical. There is no reason to believe that just because their charter says they're a co-op, that they would not do terrible things. So I think we have to be very careful. And I think it's very important that as we develop the cooperative economy, we do not develop it with the idea in mind that we are sheerly businessmen, but that we are also trying to develop all of the cooperatives we build in cooperation with each other as ideological political entities. We need to conceptualize the cooperative as a political tool and not just a tool of business. I think that's very important, something we probably don't talk about very much. The Is this channel about the coming Civil War in Virginia? Oh my God. For anybody that doesn't know about that, a bunch of different like right-wing groups are spreading false information that Lee Carter is passing a bill that what is it, like forces the police to confiscate guns if they're told to. They can't like conscientiously object. They have to confiscate guns. And that's not at all what the bill said. The bill basically just said that police were to be seen as like, what do they call it, essential employees, and that therefore they weren't allowed to strike, which we could talk about that upon its own merits. But yeah, so then you've got all of these SB 16. Oh, I'm not familiar. But my understanding then is that a bunch of people are talking about how, with this idea in mind, that right wingers or gun advocates are talking about how they want to start a civil war in Virginia, or that this is going to start a civil war in Virginia. I don't see that happening. That's not going to happen. The only way it would happen is if the propaganda we're spreading about what the bill was true. If the bill were true, if it was what they said it was, probably wouldn't start a civil war, but it would have more possibility of doing it if indeed gun confiscation laws were passed. They have threatened to call in the National Guard. Doubtful that'll take place. Live in Virginia, it's going to happen. Look up Culpeper County, which is to say they're confiscating guns from people in Culpeper County. Yeah. Anyway, counties are forming militias. Oh, well, that might be true. But those militias aren't going to necessarily start a civil war unless indeed something actually materializes the conflict. And truthfully, if they formed militias to try to overthrow the Virginian government, that probably would not go very well for them. If indeed that happened, it would turn out pretty bloody, most likely. But that being said, I do think one thing that the right wing has done a lot better than the left, and this is because the right wingers have only had liberals as their opposition for so long, is that they understand that things don't always stay peaceful, right? They're not stuck within the Overton window that all things are always going to stay civil and that we're always just going to have a society where everyone gets along. Liberals have convinced themselves that the way things are right now is the way that they will always be, and that there is no possibility that an armed conflict will become necessary inside of the nation. And that is not something that we should convince ourselves of. And I think that in a very important way, the left should be conceiving how it is going to defend itself if indeed the time comes that right-wing militias do something significant, that they do try to coup the government, they do try to take over the nation. I think that if that were to be the case, we would see fascism seize the American government if indeed right wingers could create the necessary power to essentially claim the streets, claim public areas. That would be very dangerous for us. Yeah, I don't think we're actually on the verge of a civil war. Um, I think that much more likely what Sam is saying is the case, and that is that fascism is going to take complete control of the American government. The reason there's not going to be a civil war is because the American government is a tool of fascism. For there to be a civil war, the right wingers would have to place themselves in opposition to the government, and the government is a tool of enforcement for their ideology right now. So there's not going to be a civil war where the right wing rises up against the government. The government is their ally, even though they don't see it that way. And if they make the government their enemy, it is not going to turn out well. It's going to turn out very bad for them. I do think what you said, green element, it's about to be the 20s again. I've definitely done a lot of parallelizing in my mind, having read the history of the early 1900s and tried to kind of place what part of the cycle that we're in. Uh, it's hard to draw exact parallels, that's for sure. I think that we're definitely not in the parallel of the 20s because our unions are not very strong and the left militancy is not there. Um, as for the Great Depression, we kind of already had it, but it like never went away. We're in like a long Great Depression after the 2008 financial crisis. If we have another crash, then we will be much closer to on course with what took place in the early 1900s. But unfortunately, we'll be weathering it without strong unions and without strong leftist militancy, which is very, very dangerous. Sam S says, "What book would you recommend we all read?" Um, the one I've been recommending there. I'll do you one better. There's two books that I would like a lot of people to read. If you are wanting to understand history and you're wanting to understand the hierarchy, how hierarchy has been damaging throughout history, the various democratic or semi-democratic movements which have existed, and you'd like to see an anarchist analysis of what power has been, I would recommend Nationalism and Culture by Rudolf Rocker. It's long, but it is excellent. Rudolf Rocker was an anarcho-syndicalist and a historian, and I consider it to be possibly one of the most important books I ever read. So I highly recommend Nationalism and Culture by Rudolf Rocker. Another book that I think would probably create a lot of sectarianism among anarchists and would probably spur them to be a lot more anti-Leninist than they currently are is a shorter book called The Bolsheviks and Workers' Control by a guy named Maurice Brinton. And the Bolsheviks and Workers' Control is actually a very objective historical account of what took place in the USSR, in the early USSR. And I say it's objective because he does very little editorializing. The Bolsheviks and Workers' Control is essentially just a sequential statement of events, telling you precisely what took place, literally just separating them by the year and the date, saying this year, this date, this happened. This year, this date, this happened. Very, very dry. Very little editorializing, very little ideological component being injected inside of it. Yet, one cannot read that order of events and come out with the hagiography of the USSR, that the USSR wanted socialism and was doing everything it could to enact socialism. Nobody can come out of reading that book and still believe that. Lenin actively undermined all of the bodies of worker control in the early USSR, and did so consciously, avowedly, and saying precisely what he was doing, that he thought worker management was quote unquote anarchic, and that central state control had to replace it. So I recommend those two books. Very different kinds of things. And yeah. Sam, yeah, I think probably we got more in common with like the 1890s and the 1920s. And one of the things that we have in common with the 1890s is that we're in the time where the theory is being rediscovered, or our understanding of the world is being conceptualized. We are building the structures. The structures aren't there yet. We are enforcing the ideas that we are discovering as we speak, as the world appears to be falling apart and the Gilded Age is coming to a close, or at least it appears that way. So I think if that's the case, if indeed we're just repeating an arc, which we should never see it that way, the Great Depression is a little ways out. And so is the time when our leftist militancy and our ability to derive extractions and revolutionary movements. I think we're a little ways away from that. People like to imagine we're a lot stronger than we actually are. The Bolsheviks and workers' control. Yeah, you found it. There you go. Yes, Lenin also jailed anarchists and only let them out for Kropotkin's funeral. Yeah, that one's there's some pretty crazy stuff between Lenin and Kropotkin. Very weird. Leninists a lot of the time will be like, Lenin treated the anarchists really well. When Kropotkin came back, he like gave him a place to stay, and like when he died, he gave him, a great funeral fit for a revolutionary and all this stuff. And it's like Lenin was actively suppressing the anarchists. Not only were they arresting them and suppressing them in a physical sense, they were suppressing anarchist ideology. And anywhere where the anarchists had been successful or had been implemental in the Russian Revolution, each of the bodies which represented the anarchist contingency were the ones that went first, because the anarchists wanted to prefigure socialism, directly wanted to create socialism. So they created what were called the factory committees. The factory committees were workers' councils. So essentially, the whole factory was literally democratically controlled by the workers, and they would delegate management as needed and fire them as needed, and all of that. Those were sort of reviled by the Bolsheviks because they were seen as too much worker control. The Bolsheviks thought there needs to be more centralization. So, there was always a very bad relationship between the Bolsheviks and the anarchists, even though the anarchists did some of the most militant aspect of the Russian Revolution. Green Element says Emma Goldman is my favorite feminist ever. Yeah, no, I definitely prefer a Goldman style of feminism over modern liberal feminism. No doubt about that. So you want anarchy or left-wing control? Well, anarchism is left-wing. They're left-wing. Do you mean broad left-wing control? You mean left-wing unity control? Or because anarchism is a left-wing ideology. Anarchism is a horizontal society, a society that is governed directly by the people. So given that leftism is defined by worker control of their workplaces, anarchism inherently implies leftism, because Anarchism would not only be worker control of the workplaces, it would be citizen control of society. So that includes worker control of the workplaces. Oh, I just saw up above where you asked Cody, what are your political views? Um, I generally identify as an anarcho-syndicalist. Anarchy is no one is in control. The left wants to be in full control the way I understand it. Okay. No, I don't agree with that assessment at all. Uh, anarchy anarchy is not no one is in control. Anarchy is everyone is in control. Okay. Um, so anarchism is not chaos. Anarchism is not primitivism. Okay. Anarchism is that all of society decides upon an equal basis how society is managed. So that generally actually means anarchism means direct democracy. So anarchism means there would still be voting. We would still, most people agree, we would enact some form of laws. Some people, and therefore, we would actually have control in society. Society would control itself. Society would consent to the way it controlled itself, as opposed to being controlled by some central apparatus, such as a state. Yes, as Green Element says, I would argue anarchy is the most orderly form of organization. It is the opposite of chaos. Anarchism equals democracy. Correct. The more direct the democracy, the more anarchistic. So when you say the left wants to be in full control of what? Because remember, there's authoritarian leftism and then there's anti-authoritarian leftism. So if all you're going to say is anarchy is chaos, all I can say is I disagree. That has never been what anarchy has been conceptualized as. Anarchy, the phrase anarchy, archy referring to hierarchy and meaning not, is just saying no hierarchy. It's not saying chaos. You're right. Say that's how people use it in a general sense. But if you were to read anarchists, they do not want chaos. That is not what anarchists want. That is not what any anarchist writer has condoned. Nobody wants chaos. Cody says, so do you believe you should be able to tell me what to do? Let me ask you a question, Cody. Do you think you should be allowed to murder people? I'll give you time to respond to that. Do you think you should be allowed to murder people? You should be able to own weapons. Yeah, I didn't say otherwise. In fact, most leftists would agree that people need to be armed. But I didn't ask if you should be allowed to own weapons. I asked if you should be allowed to murder people. And I'm asking this because I assume your answer is no. And if your answer is no, then you must have some conception that other people, that you want to control people and prevent them from murdering each other. There must be some mechanism in your mind by which we stop people from killing each other. Okay? So if that's the idea, if your conception of control is just stopping people from doing what they want to do, everybody wants some form of control over society. There is no part of the political spectrum where somebody does not conceive of mechanisms for control. We all want control of some sort. The sort of control that we're asking for is what differs. So what I want is a society where no one is allowed to concentrate too much power such that they are not able to be held accountable to the people over which they hold power. I want, as Sam says, collective decision making. I want everyone to hold equal power, And insofar as any power is appointed to a person or group of people, that group of people can have that power taken away if they abuse it or whenever the people that gave it to them see fit. Said otherwise, I want a society based upon consent. That is what Sam is saying. I want a society based on consent. I don't think that people should be in a situation where they are forced to do things that they have not consented to. And I think that the society we live in, both in the aspect that it has a state that is highly coercive and that it is capitalist, it means that we live in a society where we have both primary forms of coercion in our lives. So I want a society where, oh, okay, sorry. Cody finally says, my phone died. No, we shouldn't be allowed to murder. Okay. Well, if your phone died, you may not have heard my response. But what I'm trying to say when I ask that question is basically everybody wants to control the behaviors of society in some particular way. I want a society where the way that people's behaviors are controlled is by communal consent. That's the short version of what I went on to say. I want a society where what determines the range of acceptable behaviors is just what we all agree to. Not what some other body agrees to, not what some dictatorial, figure agrees to for us, but then instead we make all the decisions for ourselves as a society, that we consent to the way society is formed, and that if we do not consent to the way society is formed, that recourse is given to us such that we may reform society to better fit our continuing consent. You say, so what if only half or 60% agree? Well, this is historically the reason why most anarchists want what is called a consensus democracy, and I am the same. Now, I personally think we need some kind of modified consensus democracy, but the default of a consensus democracy is that you get almost completely unanimous approval. Personally, I think that on a large scale, that's going to be very, very challenging. Even in a society with, where we're living in an anarchist society, and most people agree that we dislike hierarchy and we want to consent to how we act, you're still probably not going to get like high consensus. So what I think we should do is we should start with an extremely high consensus. If we don't meet that burden, say set it at 90%, 90% of above, it just instantly passes. If you hit 90% above in the first round of voting, it passes. That's consensus. But if it doesn't, then you go through a long deliberation period. People basically are going to discuss, debate. They're going to offer amendments. If those people are going to agree, if their amendments are taken into account, then they vote yes. So then what you're going to do is you're going to have a process by which you then assess the amendments. People are going to get time to deliberate and represent those amendments. And you're going to try to reach that broader consensus. You're going to try to reach 90% through amendments. In smaller bodies, this is like actually pretty easy to do. In fact, I've been in several organizations where this method works really well. However, when you get things into larger societal contexts, you're definitely going to get disagreements. So there needs to be a contention process. If you don't hit that 90%, then and you don't hit 90% and you go through the entire process of amending, you listen to everyone's disputes, but you need to make a decision, you lower the consensus. You lower it to, I personally think you would lower it to somewhere around 2/3. And I've proposed this because historically you'll find that's about where the split is. The split is that if you really, really work on a contentious issue, you can get about 2/3 of the populace to agree to what needs to be done. So you go to that new threshold. Don't meet it, repeat the whole process you already did again. Amendments, debate the amendments, delegate people to represent them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I actually have a video on this. Since you're here watching my live stream, I recommend you go watch the video called After the Revolution, which is me laying out what I think a good way to structure a future anarchist society would be. You say, how are you a leftist? Your ideas are closely tied to the right. No, my ideas are the opposite. The right wing is defined by a belief in private ownership of anything, and that includes the workplaces. So the right wing, what it means to be a right winger, is to believe in capitalism, and capitalism is the belief that the person who owns the means of production is not the person who operates them. It is to say, if I have the investment capital to own a workplace, that I can then sign labor contracts where I take the value of people's labor and return to them some wage, regardless of what they actually generate for me. So no, I'm the exact opposite of a right winger. Now, you probably have some conception of what the right wing means that is not in line with that description I just gave. And if that's the case, then you're probably just misunderstanding the words that we're using. I assume when you say the right, you're speaking of some cultural component. You are identifying it somehow with positions you see as belonging to the Republican Party or some element of the right wing as being about freedom and liberty. Um, so you think I should start a business with my money, then give it to the workers? No, I think that as soon as you hire a worker, that worker should be able to democratically decide with you, with equal weight, how that business is run. And I actually think that insofar as we're talking about how society should be structured, no one should even be able to start a business that functions as a corporation. Every business that is ever opened should be a cooperative. Every business, just like every governmental entity, should be fully democratic. I believe all power structures should be held democratically accountable to the people. And the workplace is a power structure. Therefore, it should be held accountable just as a state should be held accountable. Said otherwise, I just don't believe in dictators. I don't really care what the justification for why the dictator is in place. A dictator is just should not be allowed. I don't think that they should be allowed to be a dictator because they had money to start with. I don't think they should be able to be a dictator because of, the right of kings. I don't think they should be able to be a dictator because God appointed them. I just don't care what the rationale is for why they're a dictator. No dictators across the board, period. There are no exceptions in my mind. No, you can't choose to work there or not. If you choose not to work, you starve or you become homeless. Every single time that a labor contract is negotiated between a worker and a business owner, the business owner is not actively, but through implication, holding the gun of starvation and deprivation against the head of the worker. They are not saying it out loud, but they are always, the subtext is, don't take my labor contract and die. The same, work somewhere else, the same thing happens there. Everywhere you go, there is nowhere where that is not the implicit threat. There is no place where you will ever go and or try to negotiate a contract where you will not, there is not the inherent supposition, you either take my contract or you starve. You don't take my contract, you go to him, same deal. Same deal everywhere. That's just how it works. So no, you are not consenting to work under capitalism. You are forced to work, and you are forced to work at threat of starvation and death. So no, there is no consent in the corporate world. You don't feel that threat, but you know it's true. That's the whole point. If you didn't work, you would have no money. If you had no money, you would not eat. And if you didn't eat, you would starve. And if you didn't have money, you couldn't pay rent and you would live on the street. Capitalism constantly uses these threats as a way to coerce more and more out of us. Capitalism wants to treat its homeless terrible. It wants to treat those who are without a job as bad as conceivably possible, because what it wants is a more and more dire threat upon those who choose not to take the work contracts of the businesses that they go to. If you notice, the right wing is constantly looking for a way to increase the force of deprivation upon the people. It's constantly in a process where it wants to make the threat of homelessness more dire if you don't take their job. That it wants to make what happens to you. They want to cut food stamps. They want to cut Social Security. They don't want you to have health care. They want that to be provided by your boss. They want everything to be provided by your boss. This is perfectly in line with what I just said. Why do you think that's the case? It's the case because they know what I just said. They know that they can negotiate a lopsided contract with you if you are going to be deprived as an alternative. And therefore, they want you to be as deprived as possible as an alternative. So they dress it up in all kinds of fancy words and all kinds of different phrases about personal responsibility and all this stuff. But the truth is, corporations just want the alternative to taking their contracts to be the most miserable form of existence imaginable, so that they can sign the most lopsided, unfair contract with you conceivable. So here's my alternative. My alternative is that everywhere you go, you control that workplace, and that the workplaces in society are integrated democratically into how society functions. Number one. Number two, I don't think that the alternative to labor should be extreme deprivation. Okay. So I think that everybody should be by default provided basic necessities of food, housing, water, healthcare, transportation, such that when they go to negotiate a contract with, say, an economy full of co-ops, there's no gun being held to their head. They're not being told, do this or or starve on the streets. Okay. They're instead doing it because, as you are trying to present it, I feel like I get fairly compensated for my work. I have the next 2 weeks off and I'll still be paid. I want that to be what is the actual reason why everybody labors. Everybody labors because they feel like they are being fairly compensated, and they want to labor, and they want to make the deal with these co-ops that if they labor for that co-op and they have democratic control, that they will be compensated for their work. The society we currently have and the way that capitalism wants it to be is that people are as deprived as possible as an alternative to employment. And therefore, there's no consent in employment. Employment is necessary because the alternative is deprivation. Well, Cody, it sounds like you have a great job, and I'm sorry that everybody else is suffering, but Most other people don't have this great job where they are being given 2 weeks off and getting raises all the time. Okay. We live in a society where most people can't even afford a $1,000 emergency. I, for example, live paycheck to paycheck and cannot even save money because I basically don't make enough to save money. And most people are this way. This is the way that it is for most people in this society. And it is organized that way on purpose. It's organized that way because that is what allows the people at the very top to live lavish lifestyles and for these corporations to make extraordinary amounts of money. They're doing it by depriving you. And I don't know, maybe you have some great life, Cody, but most people do not. Yeah. So it sounds like you're one of the 70,000 a year, 2 weeks for winter break and summers. Sounds like you are luckier than most people, Cody. So I would not take your situation as a demonstration of what it is like to be most people in this society. And if you don't stand in solidarity with the other people in society who do have a situation worse than you, I guarantee you, your situation will not last very long. Because guess what? Everybody who is not at the very top is just waiting for their work to be deprived. They are waiting for their wages to maybe not be cut, but to suffocate over time. We live in a society where if the workers do not work together and they don't stand in solidarity with each other, then the workers will be deprived. And capitalism wants to pit us against each other in as many ways as conceivably possible. If you're making $70,000 a year, I'm glad you're making $70,000 a year. I have no resentment towards you. I'm happy that you're getting paid well. Okay. But if you think that because you are getting paid well, that we live in a society that is well structured and that everybody else and that most other people, people that are making much less than you, are not doing so at threat of deprivation, starvation, you're living in a fantasy land. It's that simple. You're living in a fantasy land. And you're living in a highly insulated fantasy land, it sounds like. You say the world is cutthroat. Well, it sounds like the world is cutthroat because you won't stand in solidarity with your fellow workers. The world is cutthroat because of the things you're saying right now, because you got yours and that's good enough, right? Is that the way we want society to be? What I'm trying to say is it's not. I'm not trying to fight for a society like that. I'm not trying to fight for a society where I make excuses for why other people are suffering. I'm not going to make excuses for other people suffering. A lot of people choose to be lazy. The people that work the hardest are the poorest. Okay? The people that work the least, the laziest, those are the ones who are richest. Do you think that the kids who got millions of dollars from their parents work the hardest? Do you think Jeff Bezos is the hardest worker in America? It's nonsense. This is a complete nonsense view of the world. The people who work hardest are not paid very much. Working hard is not why you get paid well. And not getting paid much does not mean you are lazy. In fact, I think it was Bill Gates himself that said he's looking for people that are fundamentally lazy. He's looking for people that are trying to conceptualize ways to work less. Because when you figure out ways to work less, you're trying to streamline things. You're trying to make things more efficient. Now you can see he had a different conception of this, but this is precisely the idea here. As you go up the scale, you get paid more and more, you're doing less and less and less work. You're just telling people to do what to do more and more and more. The higher up the scale you go, the more you're just telling people who actually work hard how to work hard. You say, I worked in fast food and was a custodian before I worked my way up. Maybe that's true, but it really is completely irrelevant to what I'm saying. I mean, none of that changes anything I just said. I agree, Cody. If everyone worked hard, do you think everyone would be rich? You going to answer the question, Cody? Cody, if everyone worked hard, do you believe everyone would be rich? Because here's the truth. It's not about working hard. The system is set up such that those who work hardest are the ones at the bottom. Okay? You say no because getting paid has nothing to do with how hard you work. It just literally doesn't. Even capitalists don't think that. That's just empty propaganda. You the society is not set up such that everybody can succeed. Okay. And this is I work out this thought experiment every single time I talk with somebody. I'll like talk to somebody and they'll be like, well, I'm a management consultant. I make $300,000 a year. And I say to them, do you think everybody can be a management consultant? They say, no, well, definitely not. There's just not enough positions. Okay. So what is the path to success for all these people? They say, go get a software engineering degree. Do you think everybody in society could stop being McDonald's clerks? Do you think that everybody could stop being farmers and go get a software engineering degree? You think we could employ all of society as software engineers? It's nonsense. It's a complete nonsense way to see the world. There are just not these jobs for everyone to succeed. We don't live in a society where everyone can succeed. We live in a society where all of the jobs at the bottom that actually do most of the labor that makes society run, those are the ones that are most deprived. Those are the ones where the money has been taken away from them most, and it has been sucked into the very, very, very top. And the reason this has taken place is because there is no democratic recourse for those people, because those people do not control their workplaces. Do you understand? Okay, Cody. So seems like you're just kind of ignoring what I'm saying. You say, I managed a KFC and offered promotions to people all the time. They've declined my offer. Reason being, they said it was too hard. It's a choice to succeed. Once again, not everybody can move up the chain. If you would have promoted somebody from the job of a cashier, from the fry cook up the ladder, you would have had to hire more fry cooks. Somebody has to do that job. Somebody has to do the jobs at the bottom. And there is no reason why the people at the bottom have to be paid like slave laborers. Okay? There's just no reason why things have to be set up that way. The only reason it's set up that way is because businesses are dictatorships. Private entities, corporations, are dictatorships. Okay? So, no, screw that system. I do not advocate it. Do you understand now why I'm not a right winger? I do not advocate private dictatorship. Okay. So if you advocate private dictatorship, that's on you. I think that it's immoral, but I do not. Cody, you say, I don't work at KFC. I work in the school system. Can everybody work in the school system? Who's going to work at KFC if everybody works in the school system, Cody? Who's gonna be the fry cook, huh? Who's gonna do the majority of jobs in society? There's just no reason why the masses of people should have to work terrible jobs that barely pay them anything. This is the long and short of it. You can justify it however you like, but this is the way that this is the way that it works. This is the reason why socialists do not advocate private workplaces, privately owned workplaces. We do not advocate dictatorships. Don't know. Cody might have come here from my Twitter because I have a lot of right-wing hate followers. Here's a little kitty, though. Oh. 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 Yes. Yes, that cat is definitely an anarchist. She does not take well to any sort of authority. Okay, Cody, I'm not honestly not trying to be hostile towards you. I mean, I understand you hold these beliefs. I'm telling you why I do not hold these beliefs, okay? Yeah, we don't have any black cats. Damn, I know. We should have black cats. Anyway, anybody got other questions? We got 7 people watching. Let's see, maybe I can retweet this. Let's see. Oh my god, what is even happening here? Apparently after I left, there's like this whole thing going on here. Oh my god. Okay. Okay, I'm going to retweet the link once again. Let's see if we can get more people in here. Yeah, I got Sabo Cat on my arm. So Cody, you say you don't like government overreach. Well, you're right. That's one place where we agree. I imagine we probably disagree on what's overreach. What I think is overreach is essentially state power exerting influence over the people. But I have no problem with the government exerting power over corporations, given that I think corporations are private dictatorships. If I can get the government to sabotage private dictatorships, I'm down. Sounds good. Insofar as the government continues to exist, regulate the private industry, regulate it, put minimum wages in place, put social programs in place, basically try to neuter the power of corporations. Insofar as the government is still allowed to exist, that's what I want it to do. Thanks, Danny. So I guess here in this lull, I'll just say I have a GoFundMe up. I got into a car wreck, smashed up my car, totaled it. So I have a GoFundMe up trying to raise some money in order to buy a new one. Right now, I'm literally only able to do my job because of the charity of my parents. If you guys want to go donate to that, that would be great. Also, I have a Patreon. If any of you want to help me do my work, going to Patreon and pledging some amount of money per month is fantastic. Helps me literally for the last 3 months. When my Patreon funds have come in, it was during a time when I would not have been able to afford groceries if my patrons had not pledged money to me. So it is very helpful. My patrons are helping me so much, and if I can get more of them, then I would be able to do this work a lot more often. Also, if any of you here are not subscribed to my channel, I would ask you guys to subscribe. That would be wonderful. Let's see here. So Green Element says, what are some of your favorite living anarchists? Chomsky and Graeber are some of mine. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think Chomsky is probably one of the greatest living anarchists right now. It's hard to dispute that. I don't know that he really has much competition. I think while Bookchin was alive, you probably could have argued Bookchin was the greatest living anarchist. I think Albert is one that a lot of people probably are not familiar with. But if you guys have never heard of Paracon, which is short for participatory economics, I think it's Michael Albert is his name. Michael Albert has developed Michael Albert, he has developed a future structure of society. He, like, kind of like me, he believes that if we don't give people a vision of what we want, then they won't fight for it. So he's created a fully fleshed out future economic arrangement where people have self-management, where horizontal governance reigns supreme, and his actually involves complete market abolition, and everybody basically, each household basically just fills out what they need, and then that is arranged with horizontal and democratically determined workplaces, and they are nested in larger confederated councils. Okay, I'm gonna give the cats food real quick. Give me a sec. Are you doing okay? Oh, very excited.
What's that?
Okay, I am back. Anyway, so yeah, Michael Albert. No, they did not. They did not charge me with a ticket. I think it's because I was having like a complete mental breakdown, given that my job requires me to drive everywhere. I felt like my life was over. So I think the cop felt sorry for me and did not give me a ticket. But I'm still screwed. Yeah. Green Element says Michael Albert's debate with Destiny was pretty cool. Yeah, that was actually the first time I'd heard about, or not heard about, that was the first time I'd ever actually learned about Michael Albert and Paracon. I'd heard his name and I'd heard of Paracon, but nobody had ever really like laid out what it was. Yes, the wreck was my fault. Yeah, I won't say otherwise. I mean, I could have basically, like, there were extenuating circumstances. Somebody like pulled out in front of me and it made it very difficult for me to stop in time. But legally, yes, it was my front end and their back end. That's my fault as far as the law is concerned. So it doesn't really matter whether it was my fault or not. As far as insurance is concerned, it was my fault. Green element. It's still a cop though. 1312. Yeah, no, I mean it's true. The fact he was even there with the idea in mind that he would be charging me for losing thousands of dollars in a car wreck is kind of crazy, isn't it? So we're up to 9 people. That's how you know this channel is a heavy hitter. That's actually way better than I expected, to be honest. I expected to just be sitting here staring at my screen, typing on Twitter. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yeah, Cody. If healthcare is made universal, your rates will not go up. So I guess I'll show you guys some of my reading material. Oh wow, that is backwards on the screen. Uh, anyway, Anarchism and Workers' Self-Management in Revolutionary Spain by Frank Mintz. This is actually super interesting. Um, the book is essentially the most in-depth research of what took place in revolutionary Spain that has ever been written. Frank Mintz did a huge number of interviews with people in revolutionary Spain, um, the, with various different groups, people who were originally in the CNTA or the CNT, the FAI, POUM, people that were involved in, the electoral side, involved with the Republic. And one thing that I think makes it really unique is that it goes into extreme detail about how they organized all of their organizations, the problems that they ran into, issues that were both solved by Confederation, issues that could not, that where they were unable to confederate, huge gains that they made in civil rights, the equality of women, getting rid of the mistreatment of minorities, protection in the workplaces, the institution of co-op, essentially a fully robust co-op economy where everything was confederally managed, and that was in the cities. And they instituted essentially full anarcho-communism in the workplaces. It was pretty incredible, and the book goes into extreme detail talking about it. Well, thank you, Cody. Yeah, life is pretty rough right now. I've been pretty depressed for the last couple weeks. And thank you for your sympathy. So you guys are talking about universal health care, which is good. So Sam Dolgoff's The Anarchist Collectives. That's interesting. I have never heard of that. I'll go look into that real quick. Oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, there's even here one on the Anarchist Library. Interesting. Oh, wow. The introduction's by Bookchin. Very cool. Thank you for telling me about this. I will almost certainly read about that. My other reading material, uh, Militant Anti-Fascism. This one's pretty good. I'm not nearly as far through it. I am only about that far through. But this one has been I read this one when I'm feeling hopeless about fascism. It's good to have a little historical understanding of what took place when anarchists and leftists have tried to fight fascism in the past. I'm Cody says, I'm still confused about you are you a radical feminist left like there are 72 genders? Okay, so am I a feminist? I consider myself a feminist. Um, Even though people sometimes get disparaged for labeling themselves feminist, even in leftist spaces. But yes, I think that there is a historically, patriarchy has been very damaging to women. It has put women in a disadvantaged position in society. Women are still recovering from that disadvantaged position, both in terms of social standards and in just in the way that society's expectations are set up. Part of that is the way that gender norms are created and enforced upon men and women. And I think that patriarchal relations in society are damaging for both men and women. I am a feminist because I oppose patriarchy. As for 72 genders, that's that just sounds like some reactionary rhetoric. Um, you can find people that have all kinds of different views on gender uh, among feminists, among the left. Um, I am personally not even well read enough to tell you which way that a person should feel about gender, other than to say that gender is a social construct and is not the same as sex. And if you view those two things as synonymous, the dialogue surrounding that subject is going to be very confusing for you. And you are also going to find that you make a lot of very unfair assumptions about the arguments that are being had in those spaces. Okay, if you're in a troll, these are just my honest answers. I'm not trying to be antagonistic. New Galliani bio. Oh, well, see you later, Sam, if your computer's about to cut out. Good having you in here, man. You can get on your phone if you want after, I guess. Tell me about Galliani, Danny. I don't really know anything about him. Well, Cody, you are talking to someone on the very, very, very far left. I am about as left as you can get, and I am about as anarchist as you can get. The only thing further anarchist than me is a primitivist, basically. An Italian American anarchist who inspired people like Sacco and Vetti. I thought I was well read, and I don't know who any of these people are. Cody, you say, I don't know why most leftists make me angry to listen to, but I could see us being friends. Well, I would invite you to watch the stuff on my channel, and if it sounds reasonable to you, perhaps you don't hate leftists as much as you think you do. Because the left is not the Democratic Party. So, the other book that I haven't really dug into too much, but that I've been reading a little bit is this Emergence by a guy named John Holland. It's about how properties emerge from systems that are not directly in the laws of those systems. That is to say, you could set up a system which had, some list of laws, but when those laws are highly complex, they interact with each other in such a way that they produce new behaviors. We call those emergent behaviors. And sometimes those behaviors are so important, they define how the entire system functions. For example, thermodynamics. Thermodynamics, I guess I should preface, I went to school for physics, so I could ramble about physics for way too long. Thermodynamics aren't written anywhere in the universe, which is to say there's no like fundamental law that dictates thermodynamics. They arise from an analysis, a statistical analysis of all of how the laws in the universe function. So thermodynamics is one of the most important things about the entire universe, yet they are not written in the laws of the universe. They're just an outcome of the laws of the universe. So this whole book is essentially about how very important laws can arise from systems that don't even contain those laws. Danny says, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing these right, Sacco, probably, I'm guessing, because it's Italian. Sacco and Vanzetti was the first trial of the century, put to death for being anarchist and immigrants on a trumped-up charge. It was a major moment in labor history. Okay, I'll do more research on that. I should probably know more about that. Right. Niall says people can be on a spectrum between male and female or off of it completely. How you want to categorize those is up for discussion to some extent. And you probably mean liberals, not leftists. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think most of the time when people on the right, or I should say so really more social conservatives, are angry about the discussion around gender issues, it's misrepresentations of people who are using gender to refer to the social constructs surrounding what it is to be male and female and everything else, and thinking they're talking about sex. They're talking about a person's secondary sexual characteristics or primary sexual characteristics, when that is not what is taking place. Um, Gender and sex are not the same thing. And when people are discussing gender, they're not discussing sex. They're discussing socially enforced roles that often have a correlation with a person's biological sex, but that they are not inherently bound to a person's sex. And that as we think more about how much the component of gender is a socially enforced concept, that in fact, there's no reason to believe that it should be a binary. That in fact, if it is socially performed or socially, enforced, that in fact there should be any number of ways that a person can express themselves, and that there should not be some rigid binary conception of this aspect. Yeah, science does not agree that there are only two genders. I think that most conservatives want there to be two genders because, oh God. Anyway, yeah, conservatives want there to be two genders because it enforces traditional notions of family arrangements that they have predicated their ideology around. And therefore, if the gender binary were somehow destroyed, dissolved, made into a spectrum, it would undermine the traditional notions that are important to them. And I think, therefore, that there is a biasing effect that they can't really talk about the science coherently. Cody says, would we still be friends if I told you I own semi-automatic rifles and voted for Trump? I don't care that you own rifles. I mean, there's nothing wrong with owning rifles, but voting for Trump is terrible. You should not be voting for Trump. Not saying that that means Clinton was a whole lot better, but you should not be voting for Trump. He is a fascist. Liberals are the people who are anti-gun. Most leftists, the vast majority of leftists, are not anti-gun. Yeah, Marx said, under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the workers must be frustrated by force if necessary. The Democrats are not even left-wingers. The Democrats are liberals. The Democrats are in the center right and are authoritarian. Niall says, science doesn't even agree that there are only two sexes. Plenty of chromosomal and hormonal conditions create quite a variety, even in the most physical sense, at birth. Yeah, that is what the science shows. Now, it's what do they call it? They call it bimodal, which is to say the majority of people come out with a pretty clean, generally they come out on one side or the other of that spectrum, but that there's lots of variation in between. It's just that the variation in between is in the minority of the distribution, if I understand correctly. So I'll probably, if we're currently at about an hour and 51 minutes, I would say if we go until probably about 2:15, I'll start wrapping it up. Um, I will see you later, Sam. I'm glad you dropped in. It was nice talking with you. I think it has been a success. Started off a little bit slow, but once we really got into it, I was pretty happy with where it went. Maybe being named Daniel just makes you more likely to be an anarchist, Green Element. I don't know. Maybe that's how it works. Name essentialism. That's the new thing. Don't tell anybody I'm a name essentialist. It could destroy my reputation. Cody, you can come in if you want. But if you come in saying the stuff you're saying, just prepare for people to be very displeased. That's all I'm going to say. We have three Daniels named. We have three people named Daniel that are anarchists in the chat right now. So let me get this straight. I think at peak we had like 11 people, and we ended up with 2 Sams and 3 Daniels. Wow, that's something. Yeah, Daniel Guerin. I actually have that book. Did he write No Gods, No Masters? I think he might have written No Gods, No Masters. Is that right? So, Cody, you say the liberals want to impose their will on the people. Um, insofar as that we've made a clear distinction between the left and liberals, that's probably true. But once again, I just want to be clear, everybody is imposing their will on the people. Like we're all at the end of the day trying to reform society into something we think is more desirable, right? Like I'm advocating we create a society that is a direct democracy. I'm trying to create a society of consent. In a way, by creating a society of consent, I'm of course enforcing that on to society, right? Like that's what I'm trying to do is create a society of consent. That means all the people that don't want a society of consent, I'm pushing a society of consent on them, right? So I'm dissolving the structures where a society that are preventing a society of consent that is actively trying to change society. I just don't find it useful to take this dialogue where you think conservatives aren't enforcing their will on the rest of society. Conservatism is the dominant paradigm of society. Conservatism is predicated upon conserving the way that things are already set up. So I just don't really I think it's very hypocritical of you to be angry at the liberals for trying to enforce their way on the rest of society when your entire ideology is literally predicated upon enforcing itself on society and making sure society does not move past it. I think tonight we have united the Danarchists. The Danarchist collective has begun. Oh, hey, what's up, Kevin? Good to have you here. We've been going for just about 2 hours at this point. If a bunch of people flooded in, I'd probably keep going. And if not, I'll probably go for another 15, 20 minutes. There we go. Got a question. Kevin says, how does science fit into anarchy? Um, I mean, there are a lot of things that have been said on how science and leftism are linked in together. Not even including, of course, the people who call themselves scientific socialists, which I have some serious criticisms with the usage of that. But um, I've always looked at it. I remember Chomsky saying something a while back that kind of like really stuck with me and is true to some significant degree. And that is the sciences are one of the most anarchistic fields in existence. If you really think about it, science is very self-organized. Science almost entirely is predicated upon a consent structure. It doesn't take anything for granted. It tests everything. Even when a study comes out and arrives upon some conclusion, people don't take for granted that it's 100% true. We ask for reproduction. We ask for tests and tests and tests. In that way, it's very skeptical of itself, which is a very anarchistic way to organize society. So I would say the sciences are actually already a very good demonstration of how self-organization happens even when you don't force people to do it, right? Like obviously in the modern day, people are really like forced into this very narrow seeking impact, which I don't know how many people in the chat are familiar with this. I know you are, Kevin, but like, that of course is sort of coercive, forcing people to try to make studies that people are going to cite and stuff like that. But the history of science demonstrates that's not necessary for people to do science. You do not need to force scientists to want to do science. People become scientists because they love learning, because they just want knowledge for knowledge's sake, right? And this is very much how leftism in general, but especially anarchists, view a lot of social situations. They don't take the perspective that people need to be coerced to do things. They take the perspective that when people are given the avenues to achieve the things that they want to do, that they will do them because they love doing them. So science is a very good demonstration of this anarchistic principle of self-organization. It's the way I see it. And I think that science is very important insofar as that we're going to build a coherent worldview and understand how we're going to move forward. So I guess that's one of the big answers I would give. I guess there's also the discussion of how some people call themselves scientific socialists, and that means kind of a very different thing. Insofar as that scientific socialism was a movement largely associated with Marxism, which placed itself in opposition to what was called the utopian socialism. The idea that, we create some ideal and then we strive towards that ideal, doggedly. And then there's scientific socialism, which says, no, we try to scientifically lay out a process by which we might achieve that ideal. We don't just aim for it. We try to lay out a science for achieving it. And even though that sounds really good, it really hasn't turned out so hot so far. I'm not saying I'm a utopian socialist by opposition to it or anything, but I'm not sure the distinction has been that useful, has demonstrated itself to be very useful in the last century. So Kevin then says, wow, well said. If science is a good demonstration of anarchism, how easily can that be translated to non-scientific structures? Yeah. I mean, my contention is that a wide variety of fields would function much better if they were allowed to function more like how the community of scientists is allowed to function. I think a lot of what goes wrong, as a little bit as to what Niall says here in the chat, he says that's how science should work. In reality, they're dominated by corrupt academic priesthoods, the mic, and corporations. And there's some truth to that. And those are, I will say, a lot of the influences that do make science go astray. But I think that science remains one of the most uncorrupted disciplines, insofar as that it is an application of those anarchic principles, because it is very difficult to constrain scientists and them still produce good work. Now, what I say is, insofar as that's the case, how many other fields is that probably the case, but we haven't given them a chance to demonstrate that is the case? I would say art is very clearly one that, lying just beneath the surface, it's very clear that the constraints that are put on artists to produce a particular kind of art, the conception of creating an art just for mass appeal, these sort of corrupting influences are unnecessary for artists to do the work of wanting to produce good art. I think that's probably true of a lot of different fields. I think that if you had a society of self-organization and not a society of coercion, you would have lots of people doing things just because they love them. I mean, we have this idea that we need to force people to go, build chairs. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that there's just certain kinds of people who really like building chairs. If we just created a society where the people who love building chairs were just given an avenue where they were able to build chairs and know that those chairs would then reach people who need them, we'd probably have a society that was like making a lot better chairs. We'd probably have a society where people were much happier. So I guess that's an answer to your question. Green Element says, I find anarchism to take aspects of both scientific and utopian socialism. There's probably some truth to that. Or at least I think for a lot of, I think the syndicalist perspective specifically, that's true for. I think the syndicalist perspective really sort of defies that distinction because it has aspects of both. But I do think that there are some anarchist traditions that are more cleanly one or the other. Um, I would say there's definitely some utopian anarchists. And this is not an offense, but individualist anarchists, I think, are generally a little more utopian. Having read some Kropotkin, I think Kropotkin has a little more utopian aspect insofar as that he doesn't even think there should be, laws. He doesn't think that there should be any formal mechanisms for organizing society. I think that has a very high opinion of all humans. I think the syndicalist impulse is very much a fusion of the concepts of the utopian and scientific aspect. I think they very much try to figure out what particular mechanisms will be needed to bring about that society, while also not sacrificing so much that the whole project is corrupted by their compromises. Cody says, I think you're confused when you think the right is happy with the government. I think everyone is fed up. No, I think everyone is fed up. But I didn't say the right when I was talking earlier. I said conservatives. Particularly, I'm talking about social conservatives. Conservatives are maybe unhappy about government, but they're only unhappy about government because it doesn't do what they want. Conservatives are very much in favor of the traditional notions that organize society. They really want things to remain the way that they consider to be some idyllic past, which is what makes them very, very, very adjacent with fascism. They think that, for example, the organization of the family with a mother, father, and two children. They really want that. They really want the maintenance and strength of religion, specifically Christianity in society. They seem very disdainful of minorities and people in poverty. They very much seem to think that they believe society is a meritocracy. Earlier, as you said, that everything's cutthroat. They really want to maintain a society where all of those things are true. Those are all very coercive notions. Those are not notions of freedom. Those are all very coercive, very much trying to control people's lives. I love that quote, Green Element. That is actually, in my opinion, that was one of the most enlightening quotes I ever read. It's I'm an anarchist not because I believe anarchy is the final goal. I'm an anarchist because there is no final goal. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because we will eternally be in the process of striving to dismantle hierarchical modes of organization. Even if we achieve the society that I've described, even if we achieve a society that is far better than the one I've described, one that's far more communist and less, or rather, not just socialist, but communist, we would still have social hierarchies. We would still have distinctions between the value of different kinds of people. This society won't eliminate racism. It'll make it where racism is less institutional, where it's harder for racism to be systemically enforced. But racism would still exist. Sexism would still exist. People would still be mistreated based upon arbitrary characteristics. Anarchism is an eternal project to undermine all unjust hierarchies, all of them. And I believe that project will last forever. Cody says, not when they come for our guns, then we become very unhappy. And as Kevin says, anarchists are not coming for people's guns. No, anarchists are not coming for people's guns. Anarchists, if anything, are trying to get people on our side of the political aisle to have guns. Kevin says, some people have described anarchism to me as a true and valid meritocracy. Do you think this characterization is apt or is a misrepresentation? I think I think that it's dangerous to believe that you will ever create a true and valid meritocracy. Not because it's not literally achievable, but because the attempt to build a meritocracy is then an attempt to build in a system of merit. And in building in a system of merit, you will be inherently deciding that some particular characteristic is more valuable than the rest of all characteristics. It's very, very difficult, if not literally impossible, to create a system by which all of the merits that a person might bring to society will be valued appropriately and rewarded as per their real value, because it's very difficult to build an objective value system. And insofar as that we build it wrong, it's going to harm people. It's going to hurt people. So it's kind of, in my opinion, dangerous to start from the supposition that you will ever build a truly valid meritocracy. All you should want to do is lay out a system by which some goal is had, and then give people a mechanism for organizing their efforts towards the goal. I think, once again, trying actively to build a meritocracy usually doesn't end up so well. It has a bad track record. Cody said, so if I said a racist remark, do you believe I should be jailed? No. No, I think that you should be societally impugned, which is to say people should hold you responsible for your remarks, especially if you're in a position of power. But I don't think that you being jailed is the solution to that problem. Even in an ideal society, jailing is not a solution to people's racism. People don't stop being racist because you put them in jail. No, I would hope that people are educated properly such that they don't act in a racist fashion and hold racist beliefs. You say people on the left do not like guns, especially the fully semi-automatic ones. You mean fully automatic? Semi-automatic is not automatic. If fully semi-automatic doesn't make sense. I mean, semi-automatic just means that you pull the trigger and it fires a bullet every time you pull the trigger. You say, and what will they do to me? I mean, I suppose what anybody would do to you today if you demonstrated yourself racist, which is to say, insofar as that they could hold you responsible for it, they would. You know, if you were my boss and I found out that you were racist, I would hope you got fired. I'm not saying that it should be written into law that you get fired, but if you can be held responsible for your views, you should be. Anyway, people on the left don't have a problem with guns. I mean, some do. In some countries, it's definitely more of a common view, but the left is not as a constituency anti-gun. Once again, you're thinking of liberals. Liberals are the ones that are more often anti-gun. Oh, okay. You're referring to some liberal making a stupid remark. Anyway, yeah, the Democrats are anti-gun. And you'll find that some modern leftists in countries where they have full gun control are a lot more anti-gun. I don't think that's a feasible position. I think we're in a position where the left cannot afford to be unarmed. Yeah, the fundamental distinction here is liberals are fine with the system being maintained. Okay, so liberals are fine if the system stays capitalism. They just think that there need to be tweaks around the edges. Leftists believe that the system needs to be fundamentally and entirely transformed. So it becomes very difficult if you believe that to also believe that you should not have some mechanism to defend yourself when the time comes that you change society so thoroughly that there is a reactionary backlash. Who will the left fight with their guns? By default, I would hope nobody, that we don't have to fight anybody. Um, but the truth is that history shows the more successful that the left is as they proceed forward in changing society in a radical fashion, that there are social reactionaries which begin to rise up and threaten those leftists in society. I mean, this is what took place in Germany, for example. This is why the brown shirts began to rise. At the time of the brown shirts, the socialists and the communists were becoming very successful in the German parliament. And they began murdering socialists and communists. One of the most famous was Rosa Luxemburg. So you have a left that is generally very aware that it's going to have to defend itself. So I definitely don't. I mean, perhaps there is some day where a violent revolution might take place and the left would target the upper class, but I don't think we're close to that. Yeah, Kevin, I think that's accurate. I think people can not want to own a gun, but not fundamentally be anti gun. That's totally true. Yeah. So we'll probably cut it here in about 13 minutes. Cody says, "So you're Antifa?" Yeah, I'm anti-fascist. Of course, I'm Antifa. Yes. Anybody who will actively defend their communities from fascists are Antifa. So you would attack me at a Trump rally, is what you said? Um, no. Even though I think a lot of Trump supporters really are fascists by the technical sense, I don't think that it's useful to go to a Trump rally and begin attacking people. I think that if there are going to be anti-fascist actions, they have to be well considered. I think that when I say defend ourselves from fascists in our communities, I'm describing examples like Charlottesville, like Unite the Right rallies, where there are literally people marching in the streets, saying Jews will not replace us, blood and soil, literally people with swastikas on. Um, you know, these are very clearly attempts by the fascists to create control of the streets. This is them attempting to scare people out of public. It's a show of force in order to make people afraid. And the responsibility of any principled anti-fascist is to frustrate those attempts and to push them out of the public space. Let me say this, Cody. I have talked with several conservatives about Antifa because it's their resident boogeyman. And every time I have ever researched one of the videos that they send me, they are incredibly niche examples. They are cherry picked. The videos are often selectively edited. And insofar as that they aren't, they are generally corner cases. That is to say, you're saying Antifa attacked people at a Trump rally. Probably not very often. Think about how many Trump rallies there are. Okay. And then ask yourself, how many times do you think that anti fascists attacked people at those Trump rallies? Probably not nearly as many times as your echo chamber is trying to convince you. Okay. Think about how many Trump rallies there are. Ask yourself how many videos there probably are. And then ask yourself, if you're an anti fascist and what you're trying to do is keep fascists out of public spaces, do you really think that one or two or three or four anti-fascists are going to show up at a rally of thousands of people? It's not an effective way of getting anything done. And it's not to say, of course, that it may not have happened, and it probably has happened a few times, but you are probably creating a boogeyman in your mind. And what you need to do is you need to educate yourself on the history of anti-fascism and understand that throughout history, when fascism rises, anti-fascism rises to stop it. Now, you might have created a boogeyman in your mind because I know I've seen what's in your echo chambers. In your echo chambers, they're trying to convince you that Antifa is the devil, that they're like ISIS or something. Antifa are people trying to defend themselves from the rise of fascism. They don't only attack old men. That video you saw, or the picture you've seen of that old man with his head bloody, if you see the video, what happened right before is that he was attacking people. That old man wasn't defenseless, okay? Your echo chamber is brainwashing you. They are showing you videos that are selectively edited. They're showing you pictures without context, and they're doing it very much on purpose. And I want you to really consider for yourself. The echo chamber that you're inside of, okay? The echo chamber that you're part of, what does it say that their main enemy are the anti-fascists? Yeah, you've seen plenty of videos because they're trying to cherry pick as many of these little clips as possible. And I've seen a lot of those videos, and I've seen the videos in their full context. And a lot of the time, it's you guys who started it. Once again, ask yourself, why is it that your community's greatest enemy is anti-fascists? Really let that sink in. That's your that's your group's greatest enemy, anti-fascists. Sounds like you're making some really bad company. Really bad. And I think you should really reconsider who you've surrounded yourself with and really ask yourself, why are so many fascists in love with Trump? Weird coincidence, huh? Weird coincidence. Why is it the fascists like Trump so much? Yeah, they're just so confused. It's not like he's obviously carrying out the rhetoric of all historical fascists who've ever existed or anything. Hmm, weird. Yeah, it's not weird, dude. He's a fascist. The fascists like him because he's a fascist. And you're surrounding yourself with fascists. They're not confused. You're confused. Antifa wears masks because they're opposing fascists. Why wouldn't, I mean, it's like, it's safety. You should wear a mask when your opponent has no moral values. When they would destroy your life at a whim, of course you wear a mask because they're smart. That's the answer to your question. Because they're smart. Anyway, so I'd say we're going to go for about another 5 minutes. These are the colors I wear loud and proud, my friend. You just don't really understand what's happening around you. You have associated yourself with some really, really terrible people. Do I come off kind? Do I come off well considered and well spoken? And you said, wow, it seems like we could be friends. That's so weird. And you're also anti fascist? Have you considered that maybe the people you've surrounded yourself with are fascists? Maybe I am actually a good person and you've read me correctly, and I'm telling you that you are in a group with fascists. You are. You're in a group with fascists. When you vote for Trump, you're voting for a fascist. And that's on you. I'm sorry, man. I'm never going to vote for a fascist, I'll tell you that much. I will do everything in my power to be on the right side of this history. I didn't say you were a fascist. I don't know enough about you to say whether that's true. But I will tell you, you're surrounded by fascists. Your echo chamber's worst enemy are anti-fascists. Really think about that. Let that one sink in. So I think we're about to be wrapping up. I'd say it was actually a success. The stream has been good. Hopefully next time it'll get off to a start a little faster now that I kind of know what I'm doing. This is going to be a really long upload, 2.5 hours. But maybe that's good. I really don't know what to make of this. I guess maybe if I just do a little bit of everything, it'll appeal to different people. I hope that like the silence isn't too long at some parts. I guess that's why the people who are live streaming a lot hire editors, huh? Too bad I am way too poor for that. Way too poor. So we're at 2 hours, 29 minutes. I guess the last thing I'll say is once again, If you enjoy my content, go become a patron at my Patreon. There's all kinds of different pay scales. Mostly what you get for that is just that I keep you up to date while I'm working on projects. I have 4 separate scripts I'm working on right now. I don't know which one will be the one I finish first. And then I suppose I'll probably ask my patrons what they want me to which one they would like me to work on, because I'm kind of splitting my effort a variety of different ways. Um, but yeah, if you guys like the live stream, know that I'll probably do more of them. Probably going to do them when I hit milestones for the most part. Maybe every once in a while for major events. If you're watching this and you want me to come on to your podcast, you want me to guest star or something, come on and talk, I'm fully willing to do that. I've done it once or twice before. And yeah, so I guess that is about where we'll wrap up. It was really good talking with all of you. I was really happy to have as many people as I did. Saved me the embarrassment of having an empty chat room. And I guess with that, I will sign off. Everybody have a good night.